I found the violation notice tucked into my front door like a parking ticket, except this one threatened to fine me $200 for what it called unauthorized exterior modifications to my Minnesota home. The heat cables I had professionally installed on my roof 3 weeks ago apparently violated some obscure rule buried deep in our HOA covenant that I never knew existed until that freezing January morning. My name is Aaron Ingram, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Bloomington, Minnesota, for the past 5 years. The neighborhood is one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looks almost identical, with slight variations in paint color and landscaping to maintain the illusion of individuality. Our HOA board, led by a woman named Patricia Henderson, had always been strict but never unreasonable until recently. Patricia had taken over as president about 8 months ago after the previous president moved to Florida, and since then, the violations had been flowing like water. I stared at the notice in my kitchen, my coffee growing cold as I read through the formal language. The letter stated that I had 30 days to remove the heat cables from my roof and gutters or face escalating fines, starting at $200 and increasing by $50 per week until compliance. The irony was not lost on me that the very thing designed to protect my home from ice dams and potential roof damage was being treated like I had painted my house neon green or erected a statue of a garden gnome the size of a pickup truck. Minnesota winters are brutal, and anyone who has lived through them knows that ice dams are not just an inconvenience but a serious threat to your home's structural integrity. Last winter, my neighbor 3 houses down had suffered thousands of dollars in damage when an ice dam caused water to back up under his shingles and into his attic. The insurance claim was a nightmare, and he spent months dealing with repairs. I had decided then and there that I would not let that happen to my house. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed on the violation notice. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice professionally cold. HOA Management Services, this is Brenda speaking. Hi, my name is Aaron Ingram. I just received a violation notice about heat cables on my roof, and I need to speak with someone about this. One moment, please. The hold music was a tinny version of some smooth jazz that made my teeth ache. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, a different voice came on the line. This is Patricia Henderson, HOA President. How can I help you, Mr. Ingram? Her voice had that particular quality that I had come to associate with people who enjoyed wielding small amounts of power. Not quite condescending, but definitely skating close to that territory. I received a notice about my roof heat cables. I installed them to prevent ice dams, which are a serious issue here in Minnesota. I am confused about why this would be considered a violation. Mr. Ingram, the covenant is very clear. Section 12, paragraph 4 states that no exterior modifications can be made to any property without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. You failed to submit any such request. I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache beginning to form. I understand that, but these are heat cables. They are a standard safety feature in cold climates. Half the houses in this neighborhood probably have them. Actually, a recent audit showed that only 3 properties have installed such cables, and all 3 are in violation. You are not being singled out, Mr. Ingram. We are simply enforcing the rules that everyone agreed to when they purchased their homes. Can I submit a retroactive approval request? The Architectural Review Committee meets once a month. The next meeting is in 3 weeks. You are welcome to submit your request, but I should warn you that visible modifications like cables are generally not approved as they detract from the uniform aesthetic of our community. The uniform aesthetic. I looked out my kitchen window at the rows of nearly identical beige and gray houses, their lawns all maintained to the exact specifications outlined in the covenant. God forbid someone try to protect their investment. I will submit the request, I said, keeping my voice level. In the meantime, can the violation be put on hold? I am afraid not. The 30-day clock started the day we posted the notice. If you have not removed the cables or received approval by that date, the fines will begin. I thanked her through gritted teeth and ended the call. This was absurd. I had spent $1,500 having those cables professionally installed by a licensed electrician. They were not some eyesore. They were thin black cables that ran along the edge of my roof and through my gutters, barely visible unless you were specifically looking for them. I decided to do my homework. That evening, I pulled out my homeowner's insurance policy and started reading through the dense legal language. It took me an hour of cross-referencing and highlighting, but I finally found what I was looking for. There, in Section 7 regarding property maintenance and loss prevention, was a paragraph about ice dam prevention. The policy specifically stated that the installation of heat cables and proper attic ventilation were considered reasonable preventative measures, and that policyholders who took such steps were viewed favorably in claim assessments. More importantly, buried in the fine print, was a note that failure to take reasonable preventative measures in known high-risk situations could result in claim denials or reduced payouts. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. The HOA was essentially asking me to remove a safety feature that my insurance company not only approved of but potentially required. This could be the angle I needed. The next morning, I called my insurance agent, a friendly guy named Tom Rivera who had helped me get set up when I first moved to Minnesota from Ohio. Tom had always been straight with me, and I hoped he would have some insight into this situation. "Aaron, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, reading him the relevant sections of both the HOA violation notice and my insurance policy. When I finished, Tom let out a low whistle. "That is a tough spot they are putting you in. Let me do some digging and talk to our underwriters. I will get back to you by end of day." True to his word, Tom called me back at 4:30 that afternoon. His voice had an edge of excitement to it. "Aaron, I talked to our senior underwriter and our legal team. This is actually pretty interesting from our perspective. Those heat cables you installed, they reduce our liability significantly. Ice dam damage claims can run into the tens of thousands of dollars, and they are becoming more common with the extreme weather patterns we have been seeing. So the insurance company supports keeping them installed. More than that, our underwriter is willing to put it in writing that the heat cables are considered a loss prevention measure that reduces risk to the property. Furthermore, and this is the part that might interest you most, removing them could be viewed as increasing risk, which might affect your coverage or premiums." I felt a surge of vindication. "Can you send me that in writing? I am drafting the letter right now. I will have it to you by email within the hour, and I will send a hard copy by certified mail to both you and your HOA. They should know that they are potentially putting their homeowners at risk, both physically and financially." The letter arrived in my inbox 53 minutes later. It was beautifully formal and professional, laying out exactly what Tom had told me. The key sentence read, "The removal of heat cables from properties in high-risk ice dam zones may result in increased premiums, modified coverage terms, or potential claim denials for ice dam-related damage." Insured parties are strongly encouraged to maintain all reasonable preventative measures. I forwarded the email to the HOA management company and to Patricia Henderson directly, along with a polite note explaining that I would not be removing the heat cables, as doing so would violate the terms of my insurance coverage and put my home at financial risk. I submitted my architectural review request as promised, attaching the insurance letter as supporting documentation. 3 days later, I received a terse email from Patricia stating that the Architectural Review Committee had conducted an emergency session and denied my request. The email cited the same section of the covenant about aesthetic uniformity and added that insurance requirements do not supersede HOA regulations. The violation deadline was now 19 days away, and I was no closer to a resolution. I decided it was time to talk to a lawyer. Minnesota has strong HOA laws, and I wanted to make sure I understood my rights before this escalated further. I found an attorney named Sarah Martinez who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in downtown Minneapolis, about a 20-minute drive from my house. Sarah was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I laid out the entire situation for her, including all the correspondence and the insurance letter. "This is actually more common than you would think," Sarah said, leaning back in her chair. "HOAs sometimes get tunnel vision about their rules and forget that homeowners have other legal obligations and rights. The insurance angle is strong. Let me ask you something. Does your mortgage company require you to maintain homeowners insurance?" "Of course." "And would your insurance company potentially deny coverage or increase premiums if you remove the heat cables?" "According to my agent, yes." Sarah nodded. "Then your HOA is potentially putting you in breach of your mortgage agreement by requiring you to take actions that could jeopardize your insurance. That is a problem for them, not for you." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "Here is what we are going to do. I am going to draft a letter to your HOA explaining the legal situation. We will cite Minnesota Statute 515B.3102, which governs HOA authority and limitations. Specifically, HOAs cannot enforce rules that would require homeowners to violate other legal obligations, including insurance requirements tied to mortgage agreements." "Will that be enough to get them to back off?" "It should be." Most HOAs do not want to end up in court, especially when they are on shaky legal ground. If they persist after receiving the letter, we can file for a declaratory judgment, which would have a judge rule on whether the HOA can enforce this particular violation. Given the circumstances, I am confident we would win. The legal letter went out 2 days later. It was 4 pages of dense legal reasoning and citations, but the core message was simple. The HOA was overstepping its authority and needed to withdraw the violation notice immediately. Patricia's response came within 24 hours, and it was not what I expected. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. Her email, copied to the entire HOA board and management company, stated that the HOA's covenants were legally binding contracts, and that my failure to comply would result in fines, potential legal action to compel compliance, and even a lien on my property if the fines went unpaid. "They are really going to fight this," I told Sarah when I forwarded her Patricia's email. "Then we fight back, file the court motion, let's get this in front of a judge." The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings and correspondence. The HOA continued to insist they had the authority to enforce the violation, while my legal team argued that such enforcement was illegal given the insurance implications. Meanwhile, The violation deadline came and went, and true to their word, the HOA started assessing fines. $200 the first week, then $250 the second week. I refused to pay any of them, instead putting that money aside in a separate account in case I eventually lost and had to settle up. But I was confident in my legal position, and Sarah seemed increasingly certain that the judge would rule in our favor. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late February at the Hennepin County Courthouse. Minnesota had been hit with another snowstorm the night before, and the roads were a mess. I arrived at the courthouse with Sarah, both of us bundled against the cold. Patricia was there with two other board members and their attorney, a stern-looking man in his 60s named Robert Brennan. We all filed into the courtroom, and Judge Catherine Walsh took the bench. Judge Walsh was a woman in her mid-50s with graying hair pulled back in a bun. She had a reputation for being fair but tough, and she clearly did not have patience for nonsense. "Let me make sure I understand this situation correctly," she began after both sides had presented their initial arguments. Mr. Ingram installed heat cables on his roof to prevent ice dams, which are a known and serious risk in Minnesota winters. His insurance company not only approved of this measure, but stated that removing them could affect his coverage. The HOA is demanding he remove them based on aesthetic concerns. Is that accurate, Your Honor? It is more than just aesthetic concerns, Robert Brennan said, standing up. The HOA covenants are legally binding contracts that all homeowners agreed to when they purchased their properties. These covenants exist to maintain property values and community standards. If we allow one homeowner to violate the covenants, it sets a precedent that undermines the entire system. I understand the purpose of HOA covenants, Mr. Brennan. I am asking whether there is any safety or practical reason beyond aesthetics for requiring these heat cables to be removed. The covenants do not require a reason beyond what is stated in the rules themselves, Your Honor. Judge Walsh turned to Sarah. Does Mr. Ingram's insurance company have a representative here today? Yes, Your Honor. Tom Rivera from Midwest Property Insurance is present and willing to testify. Tom was called to the stand and sworn in. Sarah walked him through the insurance implications, and Tom explained clearly and professionally how heat cables reduced risk and how their removal could affect coverage. He brought printed actuarial data showing the increase in ice dam claims in Minnesota over the past decade, and the cost savings associated with preventative measures like heat cables. In your professional opinion, Judge Walsh asked Tom directly, would removing these heat cables increase the risk to Mr. Ingram's property? Absolutely, Your Honor, and it would likely increase his premiums or potentially result in coverage modifications. We view heat cables as a standard preventative measure in this climate. Robert Brennan tried to argue that insurance recommendations were not binding legal requirements and that the HOA's covenants took precedence. But Judge Walsh was clearly unconvinced. Mr. Brennan, I am looking at Minnesota Statute 515B.3102, which explicitly limits HOA authority when enforcement would require a homeowner to violate other legal obligations. Mr. Ingram's mortgage requires him to maintain adequate insurance. His insurance company has stated that removing these cables could jeopardize his coverage. That places him in an impossible position. Your Honor, with respect, the insurance company has not stated that they would definitely deny coverage, only that they might modify terms. And that might is enough. This court will not require a homeowner to take actions that could reasonably jeopardize their insurance coverage and, by extension, their mortgage standing. Judge Walsh looked down at her notes. Furthermore, I am troubled by the HOA's approach here. Heat cables are not decorative features. They are functional safety equipment. To treat them the same as an unauthorized fence or an unapproved paint color demonstrates a lack of common sense. Patricia, sitting in the gallery behind her attorney, looked like she had bitten into a lemon. Her face was tight with frustration, and I could see her whispering urgently to the board member next to her. Judge Walsh delivered her ruling. The court finds that the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, does not have the authority to require Mr. Ingram to remove heat cables that serve a legitimate safety purpose and are required or strongly recommended by his insurance provider. The violation notice is hereby vacated, and all associated fines are nullified. Furthermore, the HOA is ordered to update its architectural review guidelines to explicitly allow for heat cables and other weather-related safety equipment without requiring prior approval, provided such equipment is installed in a workmanlike manner. Sarah squeezed my arm, a rare smile breaking across her professional demeanor. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over and I had won. But Patricia was not done yet. As we filed out of the courtroom, she approached me directly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "This is not over, Mr. Ingram. You may have won this battle, but there are other ways to ensure community standards are maintained." Sarah stepped between us smoothly. "Mrs. Henderson, I would strongly advise you not to make any statements that could be construed as threats or harassment. My client has prevailed in court, and any further retaliation could result in additional legal action." Patricia's eyes flashed with anger, but she said nothing more, turning on her heel and walking away with her attorney and fellow board members. "Was that a threat?" I asked Sarah quietly. "Possibly, but it was vague enough that we cannot do much with it right now. Just keep records of any future interactions with the HOA. Document everything." I thought that would be the end of it. The court had ruled, the fines were nullified, and the HOA was ordered to change its guidelines. I went home that day feeling victorious, ready to put this whole mess behind me. But Patricia Henderson was apparently not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. 2 weeks after the court ruling, I received another notice from the HOA. This time, it was not about the heat cables. It was a violation for improper lawn maintenance, specifically citing that my grass was uneven in length and that there were visible weeds in my landscaping beds. I looked out at my front yard. It was February. There was 3 inches of snow covering everything. There was literally no grass visible, let alone weeds in landscaping beds that were buried under snow and mulch for the winter. I took photos of my yard from multiple angles, clearly showing the snow coverage, and sent them to Sarah with a copy of the violation notice. Her response was immediate. "This is harassment. Save everything. We may need it." The violations kept coming. Over the next month, I received notices for a non-regulation mailbox, even though my mailbox was identical to every other mailbox in the neighborhood and had been there when I bought the house. I got a violation for excessive noise, allegedly coming from my property at 10 p.m. On a Tuesday, when I had been out of town at a work conference in Chicago and had the receipts to prove it. I got a violation for unauthorized vehicles, because apparently my work truck, which I parked in my driveway Monday through Friday, was considered commercial and therefore banned, despite there being nothing in the covenants about commercial vehicles. Each violation came with its own set of fines, escalating fees, and threats of legal action. It was clear that Patricia was waging a personal vendetta, using the HOA's power to harass me in retaliation for my court victory. Sarah filed a motion for injunctive relief, arguing that the HOA was engaging in targeted harassment. We compiled all the violations, along with evidence showing that each one was either completely frivolous or selectively enforced only against me, while identical situations in other properties were ignored. The hearing for the injunction was scheduled for April, but before we could get there, something unexpected happened. I received a phone call from another homeowner in the development, a guy named Marcus Thompson who lived 2 streets over. "Aaron, I do not know if you remember me. We met at the neighborhood barbecue last summer." "Sure, I remember. What is up, Marcus?" "I heard about what has been happening with Patricia and the HOA. I want you to know that you are not alone. She has been doing similar things to other people in the neighborhood. There is a group of about 8 of us who have been targeted with bogus violations over the past 6 months, ever since she became president. This was news to me. I had assumed I was being singled out because of the lawsuit. What kind of violations? All sorts of things. My wife got cited for having the wrong color curtains visible from the street. Another guy got a violation for his kid's basketball hoop, even though basketball hoops are explicitly allowed in the covenants. It is like she goes around looking for things to complain about. Why has no one said anything? Most people just paid the fines and moved on. They did not want the hassle. But after seeing you fight back and win in court, some of us are ready to stand up. We want to know if we can join your case or file something together." I gave Marcus my attorney's contact information and told him to have the others reach out. Sarah was thrilled when I told her about the development. "This changes everything," she said. "If we can show a pattern of harassment and selective enforcement across multiple homeowners, we can potentially go after the HOA board members personally, not just the organization. Patricia Henderson could be personally liable for damages." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah interviewed all 8 homeowners who had come forward. Their stories were remarkably similar. Patricia had targeted each of them for minor or completely fabricated violations, often after they had disagreed with her about something or questioned an HOA decision at a board meeting. One woman, Angela Martinez, had been hit with 5 violations in 3 months after she asked questions about the HOA's budget at a quarterly meeting. Another couple, the Johnsons, had received violation notices for their dog barking, despite not even owning a dog. It painted a picture of an HOA president who was drunk on power and using her position to punish anyone who challenged her authority, or in my case, successfully fought back against her overreach. Sarah filed an amended complaint adding the other homeowners and including claims of harassment, selective enforcement, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were no longer just asking the court to overturn violations. We were asking for damages, legal fees, and removal of Patricia Henderson from the board. The HOA's attorney, Robert Brennan, tried to get the case dismissed, arguing that HOA board members had qualified immunity for decisions made in their official capacity. But Judge Walsh denied the motion, finding that there was sufficient evidence of potential bad faith and abuse of power to allow the case to proceed. Depositions were scheduled for late May. I was deposed first, spending 4 hours answering questions from Robert Brennan about every interaction I had ever had with the HOA and Patricia Henderson. It was tedious and exhausting, but I stuck to the facts and kept my emotions in check. When Patricia was deposed the following week, things got interesting. Sarah obtained a transcript, and Patricia's testimony was damning. She repeatedly could not explain why certain violations had been issued or why similar situations in other properties had not been cited. When pressed about the lawn maintenance violation I had received in February when my yard was covered in snow, she claimed she had reports from neighbors, but could not produce any such reports or even name the neighbors who had supposedly complained. Most damaging was when Sarah asked her directly about her communications with me after the first court hearing. "Mrs. Henderson, when you approached Mr. Ingram outside the courtroom and said, 'This is not over, there are other ways to ensure community standards are maintained,' what did you mean by that?" "I do not recall saying that." "There were multiple witnesses, including my co-counsel and Mr. Ingram himself. Are you saying you did not make that statement?" Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "I may have said something like that, but it was not a threat. I simply meant that the HOA would continue to enforce its covenants as written." And yet, within 2 weeks of that statement, Mr. Ingram received his first of multiple frivolous violations. That seems like more than a coincidence, does it not? Those violations were legitimate, including the lawn maintenance violation when his property was covered in snow. Patricia had no good answer to that. Her attorney tried to object and redirect, but the damage was done. As the case progressed through the summer, more information came to light. Sarah subpoenaed HOA records and found that violation notices had increased by over 300% since Patricia took over as president. More tellingly, nearly 60% of those violations had been issued to just 12 homeowners, the 9 of us involved in the lawsuit, plus 3 others who had apparently paid their fines and wanted nothing to do with legal action. The HOA's insurance company got involved at this point. They were the ones who would have to pay out any damages if we won, and they were not happy about what they were seeing. Their investigator conducted interviews with board members and reviewed all the documentation. In late July, I received a call from Sarah with surprising news. "The insurance company is pushing the HOA to settle. They do not want this going to trial. They are worried about the optics and the potential damages." "What kind of settlement are they offering?" "Full reimbursement of all fines paid by any of the plaintiffs, all legal fees, a written apology from the HOA, and mandatory mediation training for all board members. They are also requiring Patricia Henderson to resign as president." It was a good offer, but I was not sure I was ready to settle. Part of me wanted to see this through to a trial, to make sure Patricia faced real consequences for her abuse of power. Sarah must have sensed my hesitation. I know it is tempting to push forward, but settlements like this are rare. The HOA is essentially admitting fault without making us prove it in court, which can be difficult even with good evidence. And Patricia being forced to resign is a significant win. She will not be able to do this to anyone else. I talked it over with Julia, my girlfriend. We had been dating for about a year, and she had been incredibly supportive throughout this whole ordeal. Julia was a teacher at a local elementary school and had a good head on her shoulders. "What do you want, Aaron?" she asked over dinner that night. "Do you want money, or do you want to make sure this does not happen to someone else?" "I want both, honestly." "The settlement gives you both. Patricia is out, the HOA has to change how they operate, and everyone gets compensated. If you go to trial, you might win more money, but you also might end up with less. And either way, you are looking at another 6 months or more of stress and legal proceedings." She was right. I called Sarah the next morning and told her I was willing to settle if the terms were as described and if the other plaintiffs agreed. They did. By mid-August, all 9 of us had signed the settlement agreement. The HOA paid out a total of $67,000 in reimbursed fines and legal fees. I personally received $8,200, which more than covered my legal costs and the fines I had refused to pay. Patricia Henderson resigned from the board at the September meeting, which I attended along with several of the other plaintiffs. She read a brief prepared statement. her voice tight with barely controlled anger, offering a vague apology for any misunderstandings or miscommunications that had occurred during her tenure. It was not the heartfelt apology some of us had hoped for, but it was enough. She was gone, and that was what mattered. The HOA elected a new president, a retired engineer named Bill Morrison, who seemed genuinely interested in running the association fairly and transparently. One of his first acts was to form a new architectural review committee with clear guidelines about what required approval and what did not. Heat cables, satellite dishes, and other functional equipment were explicitly exempted from review as long as they were installed professionally. Bill also implemented a new policy requiring that any violation notice be reviewed and approved by at least 2 board members before being issued, and that homeowners be given a chance to respond or correct issues before any fines were assessed. It was common sense stuff that should have been in place all along. Life returned to normal. Winter came again, and my heat cables performed beautifully, keeping my roof clear of ice dams while several neighbors who did not have them struggled with buildup and leaks. A few of them asked me for the contact information for the company that installed mine, and by the following spring, at least a dozen other houses in the development had heat cables installed. Patricia Henderson moved away in the spring. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had bought a condo in Edna where there was no HOA, just a simple condo association with minimal rules. The irony was delicious. I ran into her once, completely by accident, at a Target in Bloomington. We made eye contact across the store, and for a moment I thought she might say something. But she just turned and walked away, and I let her go. There was nothing left to say. The experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, that HOA covenants, while legally binding, are not absolute. They can be challenged, especially when they conflict with other legal obligations or common sense. Second, that documentation is everything. Every email, every photo, every receipt had been crucial in building our case. Third, that standing up to bullies, even when it is exhausting and expensive, is sometimes necessary not just for yourself, but for others who might not have the resources or courage to fight back. My relationship with the HOA remained cordial but distant. I attended the required annual meetings, paid my dues on time, and followed the rules that made sense. Bill Morrison turned out to be an excellent president, and under his leadership, the HOA focused on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement actions. They repaved the neighborhood roads, upgraded the community park, and even installed a little free library at the entrance to the subdivision. Julia and I got engaged in December, and we started planning a wedding for the following summer. She moved into my house in February, and we spent weekends working on improvements and making the place truly ours. We painted the bedroom, renovated the guest bathroom, and even built a small deck off the back of the house, which we made sure to get properly approved by the new architectural review committee. They approved it in less than a week. No hassle, no drama. Tom Rivera, my insurance agent, became a friend. We met up for coffee occasionally, and he told me that the case had actually become something of a teaching moment in his industry. Several insurance companies in Minnesota had started including language in their policies about heat cables and other preventative measures, and some were even offering small premium discounts for homeowners who installed them. "You kind of started a trend," Tom told me with a grin. "Our underwriting department references your case when training new agents about the importance of loss prevention." The 8 other homeowners who had been part of the settlement remained friendly. We formed an informal group that kept an eye on HOA activities and made sure the board stayed accountable. It was not adversarial, just engaged citizens making sure our community was run properly. Marcus Thompson, the guy who had first reached out to me, ended up running for the HOA board and won. He brought a level-headed approach and made sure that enforcement was fair, and that homeowners always had a chance to be heard before any serious action was taken. One afternoon in late spring, almost 2 years after the original violation notice had been stuck to my door, I was up on a ladder cleaning out my gutters. The heat cables had done their job keeping ice at bay during the winter, but spring meant dealing with normal debris like leaves and seeds from the maple trees that lined our street. A car pulled up, and a young couple got out. They looked to be in their late 20s, both dressed casually, and they were clearly looking at houses in the neighborhood. The woman walked up to my driveway and called up to me. "Excuse me, do you live here?" I climbed down the ladder. "Sure do. Aaron Ingram." I extended my hand, still dusty from the gutters. "I am Wendy Andrews, and this is my husband, Michael. We are looking at buying in this neighborhood, that house right there." She pointed to a house 3 doors down that had recently gone up for sale. "Great neighborhood," I said automatically. Then I paused. "Well, mostly great. The HOA had some issues a while back, but they have been sorted out." "What kind of issues?" Michael asked, suddenly more interested. I gave them the abbreviated version of the story, explaining about the heat cables and Patricia's reign of terror, and how it had all been resolved with new leadership. Wendy's eyes widened. "Wow, that is actually really good to know. Our realtor told us the HOA was fine, but you never really know." "It is fine now. Just make sure you read the covenants carefully before you buy, and do not be afraid to ask questions. The current board is reasonable and responsive." We chatted for a few more minutes about the neighborhood, the schools, and the amenities. They seemed like nice people, and I found myself hoping they would buy the house. The neighborhood could use more engaged residents who were not afraid to ask questions and hold the HOA accountable. As they drove away, I climbed back up the ladder to finish cleaning the gutters. The afternoon sun was warm on my back, and I could hear kids playing in a yard somewhere down the street. My heat cables were barely visible, just thin black lines along the roof edge, doing their job without fanfare or fuss. I thought about how much energy had been wasted fighting over something so simple and sensible. How Patricia's need for control and inability to admit when she was wrong had created months of stress and conflict for multiple families. How close I had come to just giving in and removing the cables to avoid the hassle. But I had not given in. I had stood my ground, armed with facts and a reasonable argument, and I had won. More importantly, the victory had made things better not just for me but for everyone in the neighborhood. Rules were now applied fairly, board members were accountable, and homeowners could install necessary safety equipment without fear of arbitrary retaliation. Julia came home from work while I was finishing up the gutters. She parked in the driveway and got out, shading her eyes to look up at me. "How are the gutters looking? Clean now?" The heat cables made a huge difference this winter. Barely any debris buildup compared to previous years. "Good thing you did not let the HOA bully you into removing them." "Good thing I had a stubborn streak and a good lawyer," she laughed. "That too." "Come down from there and help me bring in groceries. I am making your favorite tonight." I climbed down and helped her carry bags into the house, the simple domestic routine feeling comfortable and right. The HOA drama was firmly in the past now. Just an interesting story to tell at parties, or to warn new neighbors about the importance of staying engaged with their community association. That evening, as Julia and I sat on our new back deck eating dinner and watching the sun set, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My home was protected, My insurance rates were reasonable, and I lived in a neighborhood that was slowly learning that common sense and communication were more important than rigid adherence to arbitrary rules. The heat cables on my roof represented more than just functional equipment. They were a reminder that individuals can stand up to unreasonable authority, that insurance companies and courts recognize common sense safety measures, and that communities are stronger when they prioritize substance over appearances. Bill Morrison stopped by a few days later to drop off information about the upcoming annual HOA meeting. We chatted for a while on my front porch, and he mentioned that the HOA was considering adding heat cable installation to the list of recommended seasonal maintenance tasks they sent out to all homeowners. After your case and seeing how much damage ice dams caused to properties without heat cables this past winter, it just makes sense to encourage people to install them. We might even look into getting a group rate with your installation company. That would be great. I can give you their contact information. Already got it, Bill said with a smile. Tom Rivera from your insurance company actually reached out to me. He is interested in doing a joint educational event about winter property protection. Might do it next fall before the snow starts. It was gratifying to see something positive come out of all the conflict. What had started as a petty dispute over aesthetics had evolved into a community-wide conversation about property protection and reasonable risk management. The annual meeting that spring was well attended, with about 40 homeowners showing up. Bill ran it efficiently, presenting the budget, discussing ongoing maintenance projects, and opening the floor for questions. Several people asked about heat cables, and Bill explained the new policy clearly. Any functional safety equipment installed by licensed professionals does not require Architectural Review Committee approval. This includes heat cables, lightning rods, backflow preventers, sump pump systems, and similar items. Our job as a board is to maintain property values and community standards, but safety always comes first. There was a murmur of approval from the crowd. One older gentleman raised his hand. What about satellite dishes? My previous HOA tried to ban them, but I thought there was a federal law about that. Bill nodded. You are correct. Federal law prohibits HOAs from banning satellite dishes up to 1 meter in diameter. We clarified that in our updated guidelines as well. The meeting continued for another hour, covering various community issues. It was boring in the best possible way, just routine business handled professionally without drama or power trips. This was what HOA governance should look like. As people filed out after the meeting, several came up to thank me for fighting the initial heat cable violation. An older woman named Dorothy Peters, who lived on the next street over, grabbed my hand. You standing up to Patricia gave a lot of us courage. I was so sick of walking on eggshells, afraid of getting a violation notice for some silly thing. It is so much better now. I am glad it worked out, but I could not have done it without everyone else speaking up too. Still, you were the first. That takes guts. It was strange being thanked for something that had felt like pure self-preservation at the time. I had not set out to reform the HOA or to become some kind of neighborhood advocate. I had just wanted to protect my roof from ice dams without getting fined for it. But sometimes, standing up for yourself ends up helping others too. Summer arrived, and Julia and I got married in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Wisconsin, surrounded by family and friends. Marcus Thompson and his wife came, as did several of the other homeowners from the lawsuit. Even Tom Rivera made it, joking that he needed to make sure his most famous client was properly insured for marital property. We honeymooned in Colorado, spending 2 weeks hiking and exploring the mountains. It was blissful to be away from work, away from the house, away from everything. But when we returned to Minnesota and pulled into our driveway, I felt a genuine happiness to be home. The neighborhood looked beautiful in the summer green. Kids rode bikes in the streets, people walked dogs in the evening, and the little free library at the subdivision entrance was constantly stocked with fresh books. It felt like a real community now, not just a collection of houses governed by petty rules. I never saw Patricia Henderson again after that chance encounter at Target. I heard she had taken a job with some corporate management company in downtown Minneapolis and was living a quiet life away from HOA politics. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, though I suspected she probably just blamed everyone else and saw herself as a victim of ungrateful homeowners. My heat cables continued to perform flawlessly. Each winter, they kept ice at bay while I watched neighbors without them struggle with icicles and ice dams. Several more families installed them each year, and by the third winter after the lawsuit, probably a quarter of the houses in Meadowbrook Estates had them. Tom Rivera told me that our neighborhood had become a case study in his industry for how insurance recommendations and HOA rules could work together rather than in conflict. He had presented on the topic at a regional insurance conference, using the heat cable dispute as an example of why insurers needed to advocate for loss prevention even when local regulations created obstacles. "You are famous in insurance circles," he joked during one of our coffee meetings. Or at least, your heat cables are. The whole experience from that first violation notice to the settlement and beyond had taught me things about homeownership, community governance, and standing up for what makes sense. I had learned that HOAs, while sometimes necessary for maintaining community standards, could also become vehicles for petty tyrants if residents were not engaged and watchful. I had learned that insurance companies, despite their reputation for denying claims and cutting corners, could be powerful allies when their interests aligned with common-sense safety measures. And I had learned that the legal system, while slow and expensive, could deliver justice when someone with resources and determination was willing to fight. Julia and I settled into married life. We adopted a dog, a golden retriever named Cooper who loved playing in the snow. The first winter we had him, Cooper was fascinated by the heat cables, sniffing along the roofline whenever we were outside. I joked that he was inspecting my investment. Bill Morrison served 2 years as HOA president before stepping down, and Marcus Thompson took over. Under Marcus's leadership, the HOA continued to operate smoothly and transparently. They published detailed financial reports quarterly, held regular town halls where homeowners could voice concerns, and made sure enforcement was fair and consistent. There were still occasional disputes, of course. One family wanted to build an addition that exceeded height restrictions, and there was a lengthy process of reviewing plans and granting a variance. Another homeowner let his lawn go brown during a particularly dry summer, leading to complaints from neighbors. But these issues were handled reasonably, with communication and compromise rather than immediate violations and fines. The heat cable incident became something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents would hear the story and often come to me for advice about dealing with the HOA or understanding the covenants. I always told them the same thing: read everything carefully, document everything, and do not be afraid to ask questions or push back when something does not make sense. One new resident, a young single mother named Kelly, came to me 2 years after the settlement when she received a violation notice for having a swing set in her backyard that supposedly violated sight line restrictions. I walked her through the process of requesting a hearing, helped her gather evidence showing that multiple other properties had similar swing sets, and referred her to Sarah Martinez for legal advice if needed. The violation was dropped within a week, once the board realized Kelly was not going to just roll over and accept it. Marcus called her personally to apologize for the overreach and explained that the board member who had issued the violation had misunderstood the covenant language. Progress, I thought. This was how it should work. 5 years after the original heat cable dispute, Julia and I were expecting our first child. We turned the guest bedroom into a nursery, painting it a soft yellow and filling it with second-hand furniture refinished with love. I found myself thinking about the neighborhood differently now, seeing it through the eyes of a soon-to-be parent. The HOA had continued to improve under engaged leadership. They had added speed bumps on the main street through the subdivision after several parents raised safety concerns about speeding cars. They had organized neighborhood events like summer barbecues and holiday light contests that actually brought people together rather than pitting them against each other over rule violations. Our daughter, Emma, was born in October, and the neighborhood rallied around us. Dorothy Peters, the older woman from the annual meeting years ago, brought over meals for a week. Marcus and his wife gave us a beautiful handmade quilt. Even Bill Morrison stopped by with a card and a gift certificate for a local restaurant. This was community, I realized. Not arbitrary rules enforced by power-hungry board members, but neighbors helping neighbors, people working together to make their little corner of the world better and safer. Emma's first winter came, and the heat cables did their job as always, keeping our roof clear while I focused on the exhausting, wonderful chaos of new parenthood. Looking up at those cables while shoveling the driveway one snowy morning, I felt a deep gratitude that I had fought that initial violation notice instead of just complying. If I had given in to Patricia's demands, I might have faced thousands of dollars in ice dam damage. More importantly, I would have missed the opportunity to make real change in how the HOA operated, change that benefited every family in the neighborhood. Sometimes, the right fight is worth fighting, even when it seems easier to just go along. The neighborhood continued to evolve. Some families moved out, new ones moved in. The HOA board turned over regularly, with engaged residents stepping up to serve. The heat cables on my roof, and on dozens of other roofs throughout Meadowbrook Estates, remained a quiet testament to the power of standing up for common sense, of having the courage to challenge authority when that authority is wrong. Years later, when Emma was old enough to understand, I told her the story of the heat cables and the HOA. She listened intently, her young mind processing the ideas of fairness, rules, and standing up for what is right. "So you won because you were right?" she asked. "I won because I was right and I did not give up. Sometimes being right is not enough. You have to be willing to fight for it, to prove it, to convince others. And now everyone is safer because of the heat cables." "Exactly. That is why it mattered." She nodded solemnly, and I hoped the lesson would stay with her as she grew up. That rules are important but not absolute. That authority must be accountable. That insurance and safety considerations sometimes trump aesthetic preferences. That individuals can make a difference when they have the courage to stand up. My heat cables still work perfectly, keeping ice at bay each winter. They are just thin black lines along my roof edge, barely visible unless you know to look for them. But they represent so much more than just functional equipment. They represent common sense prevailing over arbitrary authority. They represent a community learning to prioritize safety and reason over rigid rule enforcement. They represent one homeowner's refusal to be bullied by an HOA drunk on power. And every winter, When I see them doing their job, preventing ice dams and protecting my home, I remember that the fight was worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone in Meadowbrook Estates who benefited from the changes that followed. The heat cables kept more than ice away. They kept unreasonable authority in check, and that made all the difference.